The latest Star Wars live action is out on Disney Plus, and they're hoping that it's going to be the kind of thing that drives new subscribers to the service, something that they have not seen now in more than 3 quarters. But is Ahsoka good enough? Is it compelling? Is it exciting? Well, to find out, we brought in Lorne Connor, the Star Wars guru, perhaps one of the smartest men on the planet when it comes to all things Lucasfilm, and we are ready to review Dave Filoni's latest and find out, does Dave Filoni have the right stuff, or is the hot seat where Dave Filoni belongs going forward? All right, folks, Ahsoka has come out. It is here at last, and Dave Filoni is going to prove whether he has the good stuff. He's done well when it came to certain episodes that featured Luke Skywalker in the past with the Book of Boba Fett, perhaps the only redeeming thing that ever happened in the Book of Boba Fett. But can he handle an entire series when it comes to his characters? Well, that's what we're here to figure out with Lorne Connor of thatparkplace.com. Lorne, let's dive straight in. My thoughts on it, I'll just tell you briefly, and I'm not going to do this very much because I think you're the guest of honor here. You are the Star Wars guru, and so I can't wait to hear what you have to say. I thought that in terms of entertainment, and that's where I'm going to come from this, because you are going to come to this with immense Star Wars knowledge. So I'm going to try to come at this as though I am someone who is mildly interested in Star Wars, a casual fan tuning into Disney Plus. Okay? Because I think those are two separate reviews. So let me come at it from that angle. I tried to place myself into the mindset of someone, perhaps a 10-year-old or 15-year-old kid who kind of like Star Wars, maybe, might be something my parents used to be into, and I'm just watching it on Disney Plus because it's the new thing. And in that regard, I think this is mildly entertaining, but I don't know that it would stick my attention such that I would stick around to see more. And so I was thinking about in the live stream earlier that when I think Michelle of Force of Light said this, Stranger Things on Netflix, every single season, people rank those. They try to figure out which one's better or worse. But every single season, it feels like even if it's the worst season, whatever you think the worst season is, you're on the edge of your seat waiting to go to the next episode. And when you have to stop the binge watching because it's 3 a.m. and you have to work the next day, you think about it until you get home and you can watch more. That has not happened here, in my opinion. But I was mildly entertained, although sometimes I felt we were meandering. And as I can't hide this because I'm not actually just a casual fan, I felt like these characters were characters in name and appearance only, and sometimes their personalities did not match my expectations, and not in a good way. But Lorne, you are someone who's invested significant time, research, and thoughtfulness into Star Wars. You take it seriously. Let's hear what you have to say about Ahsoka, and we'll find out, do the members agree or disagree with us on this?
So I think to start off with, I should probably preface this with, you twisted my arm to do this because I have been boycotting Disney for a good long time now. I haven't given them any money in quite some time. But you appealed to me to watch this show for journalism's sake. And so
we offered to compensate you, Lorne. We're doing everything in our power to help you and your moral decision to not support this company.
Right. The only reason I'm bringing this up is because I have to make clear to the audience I have a bias, and I think that people know that. I think it's been made clear kind of how I feel about what Disney has done with Star Wars.
Lorne, is it fair to say that you had an opposite bias just 2 years ago because of your goodwill for this franchise that you loved for so long?
I would say I was on shaky ground. I had hope that perhaps they would be able to salvage some of the damage that they had done, maybe find a way to move past it. I think that we're past that now. But I want to make the bias clear because my job as a reviewer is to try and take that bias out and to be as objective as I can. And so that's kind of a tall order, and I think some bias is going to bleed through, and I just want to make that plain to the audience before we move forward.
Very
so
fair.
I think the place to start with is to list the things that I liked about Ahsoka that I thought were at least interesting, that kind of caught my attention. The first thing, and it's a minor thing, it's not really important, but I like the fact that they did a form of an opening crawl. It's not the traditional opening crawl. They did something similar with the Solo movie. This was more of a crawl, and it was in red text, and I like that as a framing device because that's the DNA of Star Wars. I thought that they got the look of Lothal right. Although there are obviously scenes where I don't know if this was deliberate because they're trying to dovetail it with the animated series or if it's just a function of budget and TV. There are some shots that I still think look cheap. And some of that may be because they're going for a semi-animated look. But when it came to the planet itself, I thought that looked great. I love the Loth Cat, and I actually quite liked Hu Yang in these episodes. I thought that he got a laugh line from me once, and I thought that of all of the characters that were portrayed, he was the wisest of all of them. And I also
briefly, because there's quite the roster of characters here, and your enjoyment of these characters largely depends on your familiarity with the prior shows they exist in. Give us just a quick rundown of the major 5 or so characters, who they are, and what your thoughts are about them in this show. But tell us who they are for the folks out there who are watching this and they're just lost right now because they've never watched any of these Dave Filoni shows previously.
Well, I think that's a good point when you're talking about how casual fans are going to consume this, because I think if you are a casual fan who hasn't watched the other material, you're going to be completely lost. And I'm not sure how you would gain interest in a show like this because they're not really giving you a lot for framing. The important bits are Ahsoka herself, who was a padawan of Anakin Skywalker, a major character in the Clone Wars. She later surfaced in Rebels, which is sort of the prequel series to this show. You have Hera Syndulla, who was the pilot of the Ghost in the Rebels series, love interest to Kanan Jarrus, who was a Jedi who is now dead. The Ghost crew also included Ezra Bridger, who you saw in hologram briefly in this episode, Sabine Wren, who is a Mandalorian artist, Chopper the droid. So you have most of the cast of the show is comprised of people that were appearing in Rebels. So if you haven't seen Rebels, I think you're probably going to be lost a lot. There's also Morgan Elsbeth, who was introduced in the Mandalorian series, who has ties to Grand Admiral Thrawn. Grand Admiral Thrawn was one of 13 Grand Admirals in the Empire. He was introduced in a series of novels by Timothy Zahn, starting with Heir to the Empire, followed by Dark Force Rising and The Last Command. Those were EU novels that kickstarted interest in Star Wars in the 90s. They have been relegated to Legends content now, but Thrawn made his reappearance also in that Rebels animated show, and so we're kind of picking up from there.
Gotcha. Okay, so which characters translated best into this live-action series, Lauren, and which characters did not work?
This is where I think most of my criticisms are going to come in, and I want to say I don't think that, and I could be wrong, but I don't think that this is necessarily the fault of the actors. To me, this feels like there were tonal choices that were made, and there are plot points that have been introduced here, which are basically retcons, that I think are doing massive disservices to the characters. The first thing that I would say, the thing that got under my skin the most, is this idea that Sabine and Ahsoka have a master and apprentice relationship, that Sabine was at some point in the past, or at least now in the series, is acting as Ahsoka's Padawan, that there has been some falling out between them and some contention, probably around Sabine's feelings for Ezra, which Ahsoka is treating as a form of attachment. I think this is the wrong arc for these characters. There was a couple of episodes that dealt with Sabine having to move past some guilt regarding her past in weapons development for the Empire, and those weapons being turned against Mandalore. She had come into possession of the dark saber and was planning to return it and try to unite the Mandalorian clans in Rebels. But she could not control the dark saber, much like Din Djarin couldn't in The Mandalorian. And at that point, there was a story arc with Kanan Jarrus, the Jedi that I mentioned earlier, where he helps her to achieve a kind of balance so that she can gain control of herself and thus the weapon. But I don't believe that that was ever intended to have a Jedi connotation. These are two different characters from two different martial traditions that are bonding together and allowing her to move past an emotional hurdle that lets her move forward. That was an important part of her character arc. But
Well,
her
how
arc,
old should Sabine be in this?
this is actually what we were debating.
Okay, I didn't know that's what you were debating, but this is what I keyed into very early on. I thought this doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah,
But how old
yes.
should Sabine be?
So the ages of the characters is what Jonas and I were arguing about in the background. And so I believe at this point, and I'd have to go back and double check a couple of things because I could be off by somewhere between 5 to 10 years. My understanding is that around the time of Ahsoka, or at least The Mandalorian, Bo-Katan should be somewhere around 55 years old. I believe Ahsoka is between 40 and 50. I think 45 may be closer. I'm not
45 sounds about right.
I'm not 100% sure about that. I don't know if they ever actually stated the age of Sabine in Rebels, but at the point of Ahsoka, you've got Rebels taking place. It ends roughly a year before A New Hope. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that she was 16 or 17, which feels about right. That would put her at 18 or 19 for A New Hope. There's 3 years to The Empire Strikes Back, so figure 22. Another year for Return of the Jedi, that's 23. Tack on another 5 for The Mandalorian, so about 28. And then maybe about 2 years to get to Ahsoka. So figure she's...
Well, that's what I thought, is she should be somewhere around 30. And that doesn't make any sense to me, that this character is 30 years old and is overcoming youthful kind of issues and is trying to become a padawan to a Jedi who I didn't think was a Jedi. So I'm just totally confused by all of this as someone who's not highly devoted to the cartoons.
The entire Jedi plot point here is the big sticking point for me. I don't believe this is the right arc for this character, and the point that you make about Ahsoka stepping away from the Order and never having achieved the rank of Jedi is another problem. And this goes into my second complaint about the series. And some people have taken me to task before for having mentioned that I don't have any issues with Rosario Dawson in the role of Ahsoka. I think some of the people taking me to task for that have more to do with Rosario's politics than anything. I try not to judge that when I'm looking at a performance. So I don't really... I care about her politics, but that doesn't play into how I see her playing the character. Now, in the past, in The Mandalorian, I didn't have any problem with her portrayal there. And I felt a lot of that had to do with her adopting a kind of reserve when dealing with Din Djarin. And to Luke as well. I can understand her being a little bit reserved. My issue with her in these episodes is I think that they have taken a plot point about Ahsoka and fixated on it overly, and that is her stepping away from the Jedi Order. I believe that Disney is viewing this as her being a greater Jedi than the Jedi that existed in that time frame because she stepped away from the Order. I believe Disney sees the Jedi Order as fundamentally corrupt at the core. And I think that's actually, there is some truth in that in the canon. The Jedi had fallen away from what I would call the true path in the prequels. But I don't believe that that meant that the Order was irredeemable. I think that the Order, as it originally existed, likely led up to its ideals and had gone through a decline. The problem that I have with Ahsoka at this point is that in the Clone Wars, she was portrayed by Ashley Eckstein, and there was always a spunk about her. She had a kind of sparkling sense of humor, and this was both what annoyed fans initially because she was played childishly deliberately, but she grew as a character. They gave her an arc, And I believe her decision to step away from the Jedi Order was right because she had been wronged by the Jedi Order and the Jedi Order refused to face up to that. What she needed was essentially an apology. Um, Given that, I think that had the Jedi Order survived and had they come to some kind of a meeting of the minds, then it's likely she would have rejoined the Order. What what they seem to be doing with Rosario's portrayal is they've taken her in the stoic direction, and I think that they have lost part of what made her an appealing character, which was that spunk that she always had.
It's also hard to
This
drive an entire show with a protagonist who doesn't show any emotion. I think The Mandalorian shows more personality than Ahsoka, which again is strange.
I think part of what they would try to argue is that she has gone through this almost death and rebirth. And it's always been since then that she has been played stiffer. Even when she appeared in Rebels, she had begun to adopt um, a, a more stoic attitude, let's say. Stoicism is fine, but you still need to have a little bit of humor in there. And I feel like they're not allowing that one bit. And for Ahsoka to be as rigid as she is at this point, I think it's now acting as a detriment to the character. So those are my major complaints about the episodes. I feel that they're starting on a flawed foundation. I'm willing to be proven wrong. I do think that Ray Stevens' portrayal was excellent, although we didn't see much of him. There's also some speculation that I have based on some things that I heard in the episode that give me pause. They make me awfully nervous because I can see a couple of different directions they might be going. I'm hoping they're not. I'm hoping they threw some things out just as Easter eggs so that we would go, aha, I know what that is. But we're going to have to wait and see on those. So.
Well, let me give you a theory that I've got, Lauren, after watching these first two episodes. You and I were just discussing how these characters seem to be characters in name and appearance only. And the timeline's a little bit wonky here, right? I mean, we're dealing with an Ahsoka and a Sabine who, according to the timeline, which surely Dave Filoni, the keeper of the timeline, would be, beholden to try to keep as clean as possible. According to the timeline, Ahsoka's like 45 and Sabine's like 30, and they're not acting like they're those ages whatsoever.
Yep.
But I have a theory for why I think they're doing that. I think that they need these characters because these characters have familiarity with the people they consider to be hardcore Star Wars fans, and they're trying to win them back. Dave Filoni is at the helm, so he's going to use his characters. But I kind of think that they're chasing Arcane, the show from Netflix that's based on the video game over there. I think League of Legends is the name of the video game, but I think they're chasing Arcane with the female dynamic, and they're trying to do sort of a watered down version of that to get that same sort of enthusiasm, and I just don't think that's going to work so well.
That was one of the things that did grate a little bit in the episode is it feels like manufactured drama. You've got this retcon that has taken place where now Sabine is a padawan of sorts to Ahsoka, and they've had a falling out and they're constantly sniping at each other and complaining with each other. But this never existed in the canon before. I mean, the relationship in the past you would have perhaps with Hera and Sabine, where Sabine was being a precocious kid along with Ezra, and they're arguing and annoying the parental figures. But that's a relationship she had with Hera, never with Ahsoka. Ahsoka, she was inserted into Rebels, and she was an important part of Rebels, but she was never exactly a member of the Ghost crew. You know, she was involved in either planning or in the middle of missions, but I wouldn't call her a member of the crew. And so it's weird that they're trying to manufacture this dynamic.
Now, Lauren, every show has things in it that are campy and silly, and when you sit back and think about them, you realize just how illogical they are. Can I have permission to do that with just one simple thing about this show that really drove me insane? And I'm not trying to hate on it because I said it. It was mildly entertaining, I think, to a casual person watching. But if you are going to take a ball that reveals a map to one of the biggest baddies out there, maybe don't get on your little scooter bike and take off down a giant highway or interstate flying at the speed of light when the only thing that giant interstate goes to is your house in a giant field of nothingness, and your house is a massive tower that rises out of the ground. It's not the greatest hideaway, folks, to take your map to, is a giant tower in the middle of a field of nothing for tens of miles in every direction, and the interstate only goes to you. Good Lord.
Well, I'm not going to fault him so much for that, because that design language was in Rebels. We know that communications tower was at the end of that road. I could argue that
it's a terrible hideaway, though, Lord, if you're going to take the map.
Right, but I don't think Sabine was aware that other people were coming looking for this thing. She knew that Ahsoka would, but Ahsoka, she was going to know where she was anyway. So it's like, I'm not going to fault it for that. What I will fault is that I don't think anybody at Lucasfilm knows how maps work. And this is one of those things that is really starting to bother me now. My best friend, he always laughs because if a story has a map, I'm immediately hooked. That is one of the best hooks that you can use in an adventure story, is somebody finds a map. But for every time that Lucasfilm has been using maps, it's always to get to somebody who's lost that doesn't explain how the map got to where it is to point back to where the lost person is. And then people have to interpret it to get to them, even though it's not clear that those people want to be found. So I think they need to leave this trope behind until somebody tells them what a map is used for and where it would be used.
And I'll tell you, maps are complicated enough on Earth. When you're dealing with a galaxy that has perhaps 100,000 to millions of stars, and you've got a line going from one dot to another, good luck with that one, man. I'm going to have a tough time figuring it out.
Well, this is another issue that EU purists will probably have issue with, is that they're talking about two galaxies here.
I noticed that. I thought that was weird. I thought we were in one galaxy. That's the entire. It's the start of Star Wars. It's literally written into the very first seconds.
Well, in the old EU, there was a galactic barrier that couldn't be crossed, and that was actually, and this is kind of where I'm starting to get some bad vibes about where this might be going. So if you'll indulge me a little bit, there's a couple of things that I think might be significant, but they also might not
because my next question, Lauren, was where do you think this is going? So let's go there.
So one of the major mentions that was made in this episode, and by the way, this actually did strike me as kind of cool, I kind of hate to say it, is the massive hyperdrive ring that they have, that they are planning to use. They stole that Super Star Destroyer hyperdrive core to attach to a ship called the Eye of Sion, which is this giant hyperdrive ring that they're planning to use to go and find Thrawn. Now, if you're a fan of the Knights of the Old Republic games, Sion refers to Darth Sion, who was a practically unkillable Sith. Now, they also mentioned that there is that the map was created by an ancient race somewhere out there in this other galaxy. And there's a number of different things that they could be alluding to here. It could just be throwaway lines when it comes to the Eye of Sion. It may not be important, but it could refer to several different Star Wars alien races, including the Rakata. It could refer to the Zepho. It could refer to the Grisk, which Thrawn is known to have some dealings with. But they're talking about all this power that is going to be found at this endpoint. And they gave a planet name. I don't recall what it was. It started with P. That was one of the things that Balin was talking about. But I started thinking about, okay, let's say for the sake of argument that this map, this star map, by the way, that star map has a direct visual reference in Knights of the Old Republic. And that's one of the things that I've been very nervous about, because it's almost pulled directly out of the game. If Thrawn is out there and he's cultivating a new base of power, in the Thrawn novels, the way that he did that was he found these Sparty cloning cylinders that were at the Emperor's storehouse at Mount Tantus on the planet of Wayland. That allowed him to build up a new clone army, and he was able to grow the clones very quickly. But he also needed ships. And for those, a lost fleet was discovered called the Katana Fleet, and he was able to acquire most of those and crew them with his clones to suddenly become a deadly force that the New Republic didn't anticipate, and it led to a major conflict. So, if those star maps are similar to the other star maps from Knights of the Old Republic, and they're directly referencing Darth Sion, it may be that he hasn't found cloning cylinders, but he may have a means to construct a fleet. And that would be whatever the Disney version of the Star Forge is. And I'm really hoping they do not touch any of the stuff from that era, because if they start polluting the Old Republic, they may as well just close the shutters and say we're done.
Well, and if that's the route they're going, Lorne, you know what they're going to try to explain away, don't you? The rise of Palpatine and all of those ships. That's the explanation they're looking for, and Dave Filoni is just the man to shill away with explaining any kind of stupidity that made it into a movie. So,
I hesitate to think that they would go that direction. I can't believe that even they would be that foolish. But
well, let's hope not.
It did occur to me that okay, if you're setting up Thrawn to be a major force, he's going to need ships and people, just like he did in the old stories. So,
Lauren, anything in this that offended you in terms of like it being woke or divisive or anything like that?
There's a political subtext that did get under my skin, although I think it's minor, and I'll probably catch some flack for this. And it had to do with Hera and Sabine being horrified that at the Corellian shipyards there were former Imperials that were still working. And I understand their reaction. They're seeing these as the enemy. But it did make me think of World War II. And after the war, there was the Marshall Plan, and Europe and Japan were rebuilt largely by the Allied forces. You did put the major people that were involved in the atrocities on trial. There were some scientists and things that were brought over in Operation Paperclip that essentially wiped clean their slates and allowed them to work on our rocket programs. You could argue about the morality of that. But when you're talking about people that are working in industry, as they were in the Corellian shipyard, you don't often have a choice about who your government is or who you're working for. And I don't know if I would say I was offended, but I think there's a danger in trying to promote the idea that there is no possibility of forgiveness for wrongs of your side. And I think if you don't allow some kind of a repatriation of people back into society, then you're going to get further conflict in the future. I think the Marshall Plan largely allowed us to avoid that for a great long period of time. And I think that if you're a student of history, maybe you shouldn't be so quick to judge somebody and say there is absolutely no path to redemption.
Yeah, well, for me, and I totally agree with you, because if you don't have a path to redemption, then all you have is a condemnation. And condemnation doesn't work, for a long-term path forward for society. It can work with individuals, it can work with the worst of us, but in terms of condemning half of society, not a great idea. It seems to create a cyclical system. In fact, that's what led us into World War II, was the condemnations of World War I and not being able to set forth a system that would redeem parts of the world. For me, of course, on the woke side of this, as I said, I think they're chasing Arcane, and unsuccessfully so. And I don't know that I view it as woke. I just view it as they have caught on that whatever it is in Arcane that worked, they want to try that too. And they're using characters that don't make sense to try to achieve that. That's the only reason I can come up with why they're using these characters in the way that they are. Other than, you could say that, well, Dave Filoni, who has created them and directed them, doesn't understand them. Well, fair enough. Maybe he doesn't, but that would not be a good sign.
Make sure to catch The Pro Show, Thursdays, 5 to 7 Eastern Time. Entertainment Explained, The Culture Curve Conquered, live with Pro and all his friends.